In the lead up to the era of the Wild, the Kingdom of Hyrule enjoyed a time of peace and prosperity which lasted for many thousands of years. But an ancient prophecy foretold by an unknown fortune teller ushered in an end to this era of peace, and the means by which this would come to be was that of a long forgotten cycle of destruction which had since faded into legend. The stories tell of an ominous presence that would arise from deep below Hyrule Castle again and again throughout history. An ancient, faceless and speechless evil with only one goal in mind: obliterate the Kingdom of Hyrule and everyone in it. The rise of this entity and the attack that follows has been given the name The Calamity by those who witnessed it and survived it. But by the time the next one takes place, so much time has passed that the event fades into legend, and future generations regard them as stories and fairy tales rather than history. It's unknown exactly how many calamities have taken place throughout Hyrule's past. As of today, only 2 are documented, but it's apparent that it's happened enough times that a pattern was recognized. 10,000 years. Every 10 millennia, the calamity resurges once again like clockwork, and the evil presence behind these attacks has since been dubbed Calamity Ganon. The name Ganon finds its origin all the way back to an age long forgotten, long before the events in the era of the Wild. The Zelda timeline has drastically changed with the introduction of Breath of the Wild, the newest addition to the mainline Zelda series as of the making of this video. It takes place so far in the future that all other adventures we've experienced in the last decades have been reduced to a single marker on this new timeline: the distant past, sometimes referred to as times unknown. Beyond this point, we have the events of 10,000 years ago, the first documented case of a calamity taking place, 100 years ago, which marks the beginning of the most recent calamity, and the present, which is where Breath of the Wild takes place and the same calamity reaches its conclusion. The gap between 10,000 years ago and the distant past is one which we know the least about. In fact, we don't even know how much time spans between these points. Could be 20,000 years, 50,000, or even more. It's been made clear that the evil known as Calamity Ganon dates back all the way to the distant past and has stubbornly persisted over the ages, making a continuous effort to bring the kingdom to its knees. But whispers say that the monstrosity we see today was once a mortal man, a king from the desert who went by the name of Ganondorf, and at some point in his life obtained a piece of the most powerful relic in existence, the Triforce. With it he became the self-proclaimed King of Evil, also referred to as the Demon King, and allowed him to transform into a beast-like alter ego, Ganon. With his newfound power, he attempted to rule the kingdom by force again and again. But every time he did, an incarnation of a hero and a princess would rise up to face him, preventing his evil plans from coming to fruition every time. During his first appearance in Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf was never killed, but instead sealed away. This temporary victory didn't last long, however, as it took him only a few decades to break free once again, which led to the events of The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. 2 games taking place roughly around the same time, though in their own respective timeline. At the conclusion of these 2 stories, Ganondorf seems to have been felled for good by the legendary Blade of Evil's Bane, the Master Sword, which was driven through his chest in one timeline and into his skull in the other, turning him to stone. This is the last we saw of the man from the desert, and his fate, whereabouts, and whether or not he's somehow alive still have remained unknown. Until now.
The 2019 reveal trailer for the sequel to Breath of the Wild hints at a return of the Demon King after ages of being lost to time. For some, an uncertainty still exists, but his general appearance, Gerudo-marked jewellery and clothing, as well as parts of the music heard in the trailer, all but confirms that this is indeed Ganondorf back in the flesh. Though, one might notice that he doesn't exactly look as lively as he once did. Rather than the tall, muscular and imposing stature that we're familiar with, we're instead presented with a slender, shriveled up corpse, bent over backwards in what seems like a state of pure agony. Its skin dried up and mummified, 2 dark, empty sockets where his eyes used to be, and even his attire seems to have decayed with age. Whatever happened to the Demon King, he's clearly been here a very, very long time, hidden away in darkness deep underground somewhere. But even as a corpse, Ganondorf seems to be anything but harmless. Streams of malice are seen flowing from the body in all directions, like tentacles reaching out into the underground chamber. Meanwhile, a mysterious, green glowing hand wearing some sort of golden bracelet is seen latched onto his chest, clawing into his flesh, which is also where the malice seems to be flowing outwards from. The scene portrayed here in the 2019 reveal trailer has confirmed our suspicions that Calamity Ganon as we saw him in Breath of the Wild was not the endgame. The swirling, pig-like menace seen soaring above the peaks of Hyrule Castle was just another manifestation of malice, of which its source can be traced back to the corpse we see here, deep underground. This revelation has brought forth numerous theories and speculations as to what this all means. The main consensus as of right now is that Ganondorf might have been sealed by this green hand a long time ago, in the distant past. Since then, the Gerudo King has been trapped, frozen in time, his only option being to release malice to slowly accumulate over time, until enough of it is built up to release another calamity on the world above. As for the hand clutching his chest, theories vary greatly. Some claim it's an incarnation of an ancient hero. Others still think it might be a sage, a Twilight. Even Zelda's mother has been theorized in some cases. But one prevalent theory is that this hand belonged to a member of an ancient race called the Zonai. The Zonai are by far the greatest mystery found in Breath of the Wild. The little exposition we have describes them as a savage, warlike tribe who predominantly lived in and around the Faron region long ago. The reason why so little is known about them is because they've since completely disappeared off the face of the earth. All they leave behind is some of their architecture, from megalithic structures to some stray walls, statues and pillars. And this sudden disappearance remains a total mystery to this day. Had this been the extent of it, there would have been very little reason to believe that this mystery would ever be solved. But when the sequel to Breath of the Wild was announced, this all suddenly changed. Throughout the underground caves and tunnels depicted in the trailer, Zonai architecture is seen scattered about, from their iconic pillars to a large stone bridge, wall decorations, wall paintings, and an impressive entranceway decorated in their recognizable style. There's no doubt that these are indeed of Zonai origin, which is the biggest reason why people have associated this green glowing hand to this mysterious tribe. We're not here to dispute the connection between the Zonai and Ganondorf's body. In fact, given the little evidence that we do have, we actually fully agree with this idea. What we're here to do is to challenge the idea that the scene laid out before us, this room, the green hand, the corpse, the spiraling energy, the malice leaking out, is not a seal, but rather a deliberate act by Ganondorf to prolong his existence in the world. It's easy to see why people would conclude that the Demon King is under some sort of seal. He's been sealed numerous times in the past, 3 of which he was in his human form Ganondorf and not his alter ego Ganon. So to think that this is simply yet another seal in which he finds himself trapped is only logical, given the track record. There were even some early theories claiming that the green particles coiling around the Demon King's body spelled out the phrase Seal Ganon. But other theorists have since refuted and debunked this idea, which relies on being a little too lenient with your comparisons. But when we look a bit closer at the scene at hand, there is something very odd about it. The entrance to the room, as well as the bridge leading to it, is decked out with imagery of Ganon. The cave paintings Zelda studies depict the Gerudo King on horseback surrounded by some of his own followers, weapons drawn as if riding into battle. The room that holds the body has large decorated spires pointing towards a platform in the centre on which his body rests. If this was indeed a seal, what's with all the Ganon imagery? The decorations and the cave paintings heralding him as some sort of leader. There's evidence to suggest that this giant underground lair was not built as a prison for the Demon King, but instead in his honour. This could mean that instead of being sealed without his consent, he was instead placed here on this altar willingly. This sounds crazy, we know, but before you dispute this, let's first explain why we think this might be the case, starting with the motive. Because who in their right mind would want to place themselves in such an agonizing position and allow themselves to be turned into a lifeless, dried up corpse willingly? What benefit could that bring? Well, my friends, this is where we dive into the territory of the Lich.
Among fantasy media, we find many types of undead creatures, from zombies to vampires, mummies, skeletons, ghouls, the list goes on. Among these undead entities we find the Lich. Originating from the Old English lich, meaning corpse, it was first introduced as a fantasy creature in the 1976 fantasy role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. They are described as a powerful magic wielder, such as a mage, wizard, or warlock, who at some point in their mortal life transformed themselves into an undead being. And as far as fantasy creatures go, liches are among the most dangerous and notorious ones out there. What sets a lich apart from your typical zombie is that they are extremely intelligent, having kept all their memories and knowledge from the time when they were still alive. And because they're practically immortal, they are able to continue to study and gather knowledge for thousands upon thousands of years without ever having to worry about aging, death, illness, or any other problems the living have to deal with. So, has Ganondorf become a lich? In order to answer this question, we have to compare the two side to side and see if we can find any correlation. The rules surrounding liches may vary between different types of media. Obviously, writers are allowed to take some creative liberty here and there, and the lore has been expanded multiple times. But there are some key requirements that have to be met in order to be classified as a lich. One of the most important ones being that besides being a powerful magic wielder, liches are masters in the art of necromancy, even when they were still alive. As a matter of fact, transforming oneself into a lich is considered extremely difficult and requires an expert understanding of dark magic. Without the knowledge of necromancy, it would be impossible to achieve this transformation, and Ganondorf is definitely no stranger to this. He's had a wide array of undead at his disposal since his very first appearance, all of which are described as being reanimated through the use of magic, even when housing his powers into others like Zant, who was a nobody before he met the Demon King. Impressive feats of necromancy are on display time and time again. But by far the most impressive display of necromancy by Ganon has to be the Blood Moon, which through the use of his malice resurrects every last one of his deceased minions on a countrywide scale in one fell swoop. It is one of the most powerful forms of necromancy ever displayed in fantasy. So yes, Ganondorf is a necromancer, and a powerful one at that, but this isn't enough to be classified as a lich. Another key detail is that their soul is bonded to a physical object, also known as a phylactery. This is how they are able to stay sentient, even though technically they don't have a brain anymore. The phylactery is also their one and only weakness. Destroy the phylactery and it's game over for them. As such, protecting their phylactery is one of their highest priorities. This is one thing we cannot prove indefinitely as of right now, as we don't have enough information about the upcoming sequel. But if Ganondorf does indeed have a phylactery, it would present a new and unique way to defeat the Gerudo King once and for all. Instead of sealing him away once again or getting stabbed by the Master Sword, which has proven ineffective in the long run, given the fact that he's back once again, perhaps the only way to truly deal with the Demon King is not to destroy his body, but his soul as well. A phylactery can be anything really. Many different types of objects have been used, from jewelry to staffs to gemstones, and as for Ganondorf, the possibilities are endless. The jewel on his forehead, which is seen glowing even when his body seems to be dormant, the entire room he resides in, or even Hyrule Castle as a whole, which may sound ridiculous, but there is practically no limit to what a phylactery can be. An entire building or even city can serve this purpose, as described in the D&D manual. It would definitely explain why he moves the entire castle with him. Aside from that, like I said, the possibilities are endless. Liches have bounded their souls to a comet, a bloodline, another lich. As long as it's something physical, it can serve as a phylactery. Now, before moving on to the next and final chapter in this theory, let's first go over some of the smaller details about a lich and see how they stack up against Ganondorf. Powerful wizard? Check. A corpse or skeletal-like appearance? Check. Flaming eyes? Check. A strong motivation to want to live forever, either because of unfinished business, hatred, or wanting to outlive your enemies? Check, check, and check. It is worth mentioning that not every Lich is inherently evil, but in many cases they are associated with a type of madness. I mean, you have to be at least a little bit mad to want to live the rest of eternity as a walking corpse. And this too fits perfectly with the way Ganondorf is described. If you remember the quote from King Rome at the very beginning of the video, he states that Ganondorf was born into the kingdom, but that his transformation into malice created the horror we see now. But what exactly does that mean, transformation into malice? We know it's something that transpired at the tail end of the distant past, long before the events of 10,000 years ago. The one part of Hyrule's history where we know very little about. But there is one passage in Creating a Champion that does mention this event as well. It describes that, quote, Ganon, having lost his reason, becomes Calamity Ganon, a pure incarnation of hatred and malice for the royal family of Hyrule and the chosen hero. Having lost his reason definitely hints at Ganon or Ganondorf having been struck by some sort of madness, which lends itself perfectly for his decision to become a Lich. Additionally, right before the fight with Dark Beast Ganon, Zelda says that he has given up on reincarnation and assumed his pure enraged form. However, it has since come to light that this was actually an incorrect translation from Japanese to English. In the original Japanese version, she says that this form was born from his obsessive refusal to give up on revival, the complete opposite. But no matter which quote you regard as the correct one, both apply to Ganondorf's decision to transform himself into an undead, immortal being. Yes, his obsession and hatred is what motivates him and fuels his refusal to die and keep coming back. But the English text is not incorrect either. Technically, he isn't reincarnating anymore. Instead, it's still the same body, which he may have purposely frozen in time in order to persist in this world. And this leads into the final chapter, because so far we have yet to cover one essential aspect, since how does one actually become a Lich in the first place?
The ritual involving the transformation into a Lich varies. Sometimes a blood sacrifice is performed, other times it involves a potion or brew which is to be consumed by the user. There's definitely some wiggle room within the lore. But as we've discussed before, the one performing the ritual must be a powerful magic wielder, have expert knowledge on necromancy, and bind their soul to a phylactery. But there's one more crucial detail that must be met, and that's that a Lich can't be created against their will, i.e. it's something that they must do willingly or else it just doesn't work. So let's take a closer look at the scenery setup in the reveal trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. As we've discussed earlier, the cave Link and Zelda are exploring has imagery of Ganon all over the place, which hints that this cave might have been built for him and perhaps at his command. This is definitely something that isn't uncommon for Ganon to do. He's a somewhat egotistical ruler and insists on putting his imagery up anywhere he calls home, or conquers from his enemies. As such, it's not much of a stretch to think that the room his corpse resides in was made by his design as well, a place where he would complete his transformation into malice, as described by Breath of the Wild's stories from the distant past. The room definitely screams ritual. It has an altar to hold his body, spires pointing towards the centre, and with the recent trailer for Breath of the Wild, it's now become clear that the floor of the altar has some sort of ancient scripture written on it. This may seem trivial, but a common trait of the Lich ritual is that there's often runes or scripture involved in the soul binding process. Not to mention, the green energy spiralling upwards too has elements of an unknown script to it. A counter-argument to this scene being a deliberate act by Ganondorf would be that the Gerudo King seems to have been in a state of serious pain and agony. His corpse is bent over backwards, arms out to the side, mouth wide open as if screaming in pain, as well as puncture holes littered across his chest and hands. But this doesn't necessarily disprove a deliberate act. Just because this ritual was out of his own free will, it doesn't mean that it was a pleasant experience. In fact, the transformation into a Lich never is. And when we take a closer look at the corpse, there's one thing that just doesn't add up. There doesn't seem to have been any restraints on his body at all. No ropes, shackles, or chains, or anything that would have held the Demon King in place. It's hard to believe that Ganondorf, the King of Evil, would allow himself to be killed without resistance. In Twilight Princess, he was chained to a giant rock during his execution, and even this didn't hold him back. Isn't it also strange if he was killed while standing up on an altar in the middle of this ornate room? with a pyramid structure right above him as if by design, again not restrained in any visible way. A brief shot in the trailer shows a flash on the wall, revealing a silhouette of Ganondorf in what is presumably his final moment before he died. Not only does this confirm that he was killed in this room, but here, too, no restraints are visible on his body, eliminating any possibility that restraints were there but removed afterwards. The scene laid out here could very well be depicting the moment Ganondorf transformed into Malice, and achieved immortality by mummifying his body. And from the perspective of Ganondorf, this absolutely makes sense. Though Ganondorf definitely has a longer lifespan than that of the average Gerudo, most likely because of the Triforce of Power, he does show signs of aging. After countless failed attempts to rule over Hyrule, his intense hatred for the kingdom and its royal family caused him to go mad. And he decided to achieve immortality by any means so that he can set his malice free upon Hyrule in an endless cycle of destruction for all eternity. Ganondorf may have been reduced to a corpse, a shell of his former self, but from his perspective, he's in a better spot here than he's ever been. He's immortal, safely hidden away, and nobody even seems to know that he exists. He can wreak havoc on the world above with his malice without ever being in danger of being killed or sealed away, all the while keeping all of his memories, his intelligence and knowledge from his past life. Though his appearance may be a sight for sore eyes, this is by far the most dangerous form of Ganondorf in the entire series. And if you think Ganondorf wouldn't be crazy enough to willfully mummify himself to prolong his life, the Sheikah monks who lived 10,000 years ago did the exact same thing. They purposefully placed themselves on an altar, starved and mummified themselves, all for the purpose of extending their lifespan long enough to test the hero destined to fight the next calamity. If the Sheikah were willing to go that far, imagine what Ganondorf would be capable of. Speaking of the Sheikah monks, because of the way the trailer is portrayed, we were quick to conclude that Ganondorf's body springs back to life because some sort of seal was just lifted from him, either intentionally or by mistake from Link and Zelda. But as we've just demonstrated, this doesn't have to be the case at all. Perhaps Ganondorf's always been able to move. He just doesn't because he has no reason to. He has his malice to do that, and in between calamities he's essentially in hibernation for another 10,000 years, waiting for his malice to build back up again. Which is very similar to Monk Maz Koshia, who also doesn't move until he has a reason to. Maybe Ganondorf starts to move not because a seal was broken, but simply because he feels threatened by Link and Zelda's presence. This would also be textbook Lich behaviour. It's considered extremely rare to ever encounter a Lich in your lifetime. They prefer to stay hidden away, out of public sight, since, as we mentioned before, leaving their phylactery undefended can mean the end for them. This man has been safely hidden deep underground for millennia, and here comes marching into his lair the two individuals in the world that actually stand a chance at killing him. So yes, there's an argument to be made that what we're looking at here isn't a seal, but the leftovers of a ritual that was performed countless years ago. We've assumed before that the Green Hand is holding the Demon King in place, and even that it might be extracting his life force. But what if it was the other way around, and it's Ganondorf who's sucking the life force out of whatever this being used to be? It would explain why only a hand remains, and why the green energy is spiraling away from it as if slowly being dissolved. This is, again, a common trait of a Lich. Though they don't need to eat, sleep or breathe, over the course of its life it must eventually consume mortal souls to sustain the magic that protects its undead form. In a recent example, we saw Ganon demanding a blood sacrifice from the newest addition to his line of followers, the Yiga clan, yanking out their souls as their lifeless bodies dropped onto the fields of central Hyrule. An act so vile that it made the Yiga, who had previously worshipped Ganon for thousands of years, rethink their allegiance and switch sides at the last moment. So could something similar have transpired many years ago? It would definitely explain a lot of the spirit imagery seen in the trailer. Luminous stones, green energy, a disembodied hand which seems to be slowly disintegrating over time. Even the "help us" that some people hear when reversing the audio. Could Ganondorf have been consuming these poor souls for the past millennia to preserve his immortality? If so, one question remains. whom do these souls belong to? And this is what brings us full circle back again to the Zonai, a tribe who suddenly and mysteriously disappeared tens of thousands of years ago, but not before building impressive feats of architecture, including a vast underground cave seemingly devoted to a certain individual. Could this mean that we've misinterpreted the Zonai all this time, making them out as good guys, enemies of Ganondorf, while in reality they may have actually helped him in his ritual? They're described as having been powerful magic wielders, magic which could have benefited Ganondorf in achieving this goal of immortality. Perhaps even they regret this decision since, which would explain why we might hear calls for help and why the Green Hand seems to side with Link. But the possible relationship between Ganondorf and the Zonai is a topic too big to fit into one video. So this was just the first half of the story, which will be continued over on my channel, Zeltik. Here we'll dive deeper into the connections between the Zonai and the Demon King, their motivations, and the evidence that suggests that the Zonai may not have been on the right side of history after all. So if you want to, go check that out. The link will be in the description, end card, and in the pinned comment down below.
Before ending the video, I have to give credit where credit is due. First of all, of course, a big thanks to Zeltik for joining me in this one. Like the man said, be sure to check out his video as well. Second, a big thanks to RwanLink for providing the animations of Ganondorf. I think most of you are familiar with his work and it's amazing, so be sure to check out his channel as well. Another big shout out goes to one of my Patreons, Johnny Peacock. He's the one who brought the Lich similarities to my attention and essentially set this entire theory into motion, so again, thank you Johnny for sharing your ideas and educating me on this subject. Lastly, I need to clarify that there have been similar theories suggested in the past. There was a post by Wandering Salad on Reddit about the possibility of Ganondorf becoming a Lich in Breath of the Wild 2 as early as 2 years ago, which is when the reveal trailer was still brand new. Additionally, Rinkudo in his Truth of the Wild series also suggested that Ganondorf's transformation into a corpse may have been intentional. Though he doesn't use the term Lich, it's still at least worth mentioning. And with that, I will conclude this video. I will be saving the new Patreon shoutouts for another time, as there wasn't a lot of time left. This video was literally written, voiced and produced in less than 4 days, so yeah. I'm recording this final segment hours before the video is supposed to go up. Anyway, I hope to see you next time. This is Dawn, signing off, and have a good one.